Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for, again, for your interest in the Climate Justice Design Fellowship. This is a info session, and we wanted to start just by introducing who we are. So I'm Jill DeSimone. I'm a landscape architect, and I teach landscape architecture at Harvard at the Graduate School of Design. And my research really focuses on kind of intersecting issues of environmental and social justice, especially in regards to property devaluation. And I'm really excited about this fellowship opportunity that as sort of, I think the other thing that I really believe is that in enabling advocates and people doing advocacy work. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity to do that and to build a cohort around shared issues and values. And I'm here today with Nathan and Sophie, and Diana unfortunately couldn't join us, but she's also a part of the team. So Nathan, did you want to say a word or two?
Sure, yeah, I'm Nathan Sanders. It's awesome to be together with all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've spent much of the past decade doing environmental advocacy, mostly around water quality for environmental justice communities in Massachusetts. My relationship with Harvard is that I'm an affiliate at the Berkman Klein Center, which is part of the Harvard Law School.
And Sophie.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm a research assistant on the project and a Master's of Landscape Architecture and Urban Planning student.
Great, excellent. And maybe if you guys don't mind putting into, there's a number of you here, which is awesome. Maybe just putting into the chat who you are and what your interests are. We won't record or share that information, but it would just be wonderful for us to get a sense of you guys as well. And only, of course, if you feel comfortable. All right, so this is the info session. We thought it would be important to just, this is a new program. This is the inaugural session. And so we thought it would just be helpful knowing that the information is available on the website and other things, but just to go through it and to be able to answer questions that people have. So we're going to start off with just what is the Climate Justice Design Fellowship? What are our goals? What are the activities you might be able to expect? About the program, I think that this is a program that's run out of the Provost's office, the Vice Provost for Climate at Harvard. And so it's really a program that recognizes that the climate crisis is presenting society with confounding pressures of ecological disruption, socioeconomic risk, and racial injustice. And I think we believe strongly that the kind of one of the successes of environmental movements has been widespread engagement at the grassroots level, where advocates have taken independent and locally organized action. And so how do we continue these sorts of collaborations? How do we engage with diverse groups, build a cohort and support that cohort with tools of data and design to kind of facilitate discussions around justice, but also to build our collective tool set to support advocacy and work that needs to be done. And so as I was saying, we're doing that through the development of accessible data tools that can analyze the impact of climate and environmental factors and that can provide direct support. And so something that we really want to emphasize is that this is a program to support the work that you're doing and to support the projects that you're doing, and to do so by aggregating and analyzing data and building narratives around that data, as well as interactive visualizations that can empower all people to kind of form an understanding and an interpretation of data and to allow that to generate impact in terms of policy, in terms of legislation, in terms of other types of advocacy and community engagement. Sort of on the program level, we've opened the applications. We opened the applications on Valentine's Day, and they are due on March 18th. And we're looking to build a fellowship cohort of 5 individuals, and the fellowship will run from June to December. We're interested in a national network of advocates that are committed to using data and design to advance projects that they're working on. We don't, I guess I'll get into this in a minute, but we're also building just fundamental knowledge around skills in data science, and that we are offering a modest financial stipend of $10,000, and that we see this very much as working in conjunction with work that you're already doing and supporting work that you're already doing, and that it can be done in conjunction with other engagements and appointments. And to that end, I might say that what we've envisioned is work around this project that amounts to around 20 hours a month over the time of the fellowship. And then in terms of the program, what will you do? What will you receive? So in addition to having a cohort and to having conversations around this, there'll also be opportunities for one-on-one consultation from members of a board of mentors and us, the Harvard project team, that we can provide perspective and insight given our experiences in advocacy, design, and data science. And that you'll also receive data curation, software engineering, and web development support so that you can kind of develop appropriate tools and platforms for engagement, and that will be done with support of technical personnel from Harvard's Institute of Quantitative Social Sciences, we'll refer to it as IQSS, as well as using the tools and data aggregated on Google's Data Commons, in addition to other things that you might bring. And then just to be really explicit about our goals and our mission, we are looking to empower environmental and climate justice advocates and public servants from around the United States. So people working with not-for-profits and in public service to build accessible data tools that promote equity and justice in their communities. And that more explicitly, the idea is to increase free access to data on environmental issues in a well-designed, consistent environment that's both human and machine readable, to transform the accessibility of types of distributional impact analysis that could further empower, to directly support local communities and leaders through the fellowship, to support research through this direct collaboration, and to kind of investigate and spatialize what might be future ideas coming out of some of this work. Again, so just to break it down a little bit more in terms of the program activities, we're planning introductory and concluding workshops at the beginning and the end of the fellowship. So bringing people together at the beginning and the end. At the moment, we're envisioning it to be a remote opportunity. There's sort of no requirement for travel or being here, although we are investigating some opportunities for in-person things should it work. That there'll be monthly meetings of the fellowship cohort to discuss the project and the goals, that you'll have individual meetings around the project with an assigned mentor or mentors and the project team, and that there'll be a series of presentations from mentors and invited guests around the work that they're doing, but also some higher level ideas around data science and design. And then additionally, there'll be sort of optional and informal activities that help to build collaboration in a collaborative environment. So peer partners and small group gatherings, but also interactions with other fellowship programs and centers at Harvard and other places. And then I just want to say a few words then around the participants. So there are the fellows, which will ultimately be you. There are mentors, the Harvard project team, which is us. There's personnel at the kind of the larger data and climate initiatives, as well as the Institute of Quantitative Social Science. And then depending on projects, we may engage some research consultants to support the work that we're all doing. So again, the fellows, that's you. We're looking for people who are motivated, but that come at any level of seniority and experience, but that have a commitment to advocacy and that are well connected with a community. Then we have a series of mentors who are experienced leaders in various aspects of environmental planning and design or data science for environmental applications. And so they will be here to kind of advise the work that we're doing. So right now, in terms of confirmed mentors, just to give you an idea, we're also talking to others. We have Danielle Rivera, who's at the University of California, Berkeley, who's a planner and sociologist dealing with Latinx communities, primarily on the border. We have Lily Song, who's at Northeastern, who's a planner who has done a lot of co-design work, a lot of work supporting not-for-profits and doing diversity and inclusion activities. Danny Faber, who's also at Northeastern, who's been active in the environmental justice initiatives in Massachusetts and runs a center. Nina Schlegel and Billy Fleming, who both do work around policy and policy advocacy and Green New Deal type initiatives. And Abby Spinak, who's an environmental historian whose work primarily focuses on energy and equity space. But we're also building this network to provide relationships with fellows and the type of projects that fellows might be engaging in. Okay, the Harvard project team, which is again, Nathan and I, as well as Sophie and Diana, we're sort of developing and implementing this fellowship program. So we're responsible for recruitment and selection and support, both in advance of the program and during the program. Again, there's staff and personnel at the Data and Climate Program and at Harvard IQSS who are doing management and administration, as well as providing technical assistance around data and visualization and tools, and then perhaps research and consultants as needed for scenario planning, quantitative modeling, and climate research. So this is us again. I went over it, but just in case you missed us, we're sort of bringing together design and data science around these questions of environmental and climate advocacy. And then a little bit more on the data and climate and IQSS personnel, as well as data commons. And so basically the data and climate is a collaboration between Harvard and Google to make data more available and to look at novel uses of data to support climate challenges. IQSS develops social science tools that lead researchers from observing the world to changing it, so very much in line with this. And the Google Data Commons, which is an open public source, you can feel free to Google it and explore it, but it aggregates data from a wide range of sources. And so that data would be available and something that you could obviously work with, as well as other sources that you might be bringing. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan, who's going to talk a little bit about the application process.
Great, thank you so much, Jill. So the first thing to know about the application process, Jill already mentioned, is that it's open now. The link is shown here. It goes to our website. You can also find this link on our Twitter and Instagram profiles. So we encourage everyone who's here to take a look and to consider applying. The application deadline is March 18th, so you've still got 2 full weeks, and the application is fairly brief, so it shouldn't take you a lot of time to do. We're asking for responses to a few short questions, and I'll show those in a moment. And we're also asking you to submit a resume. So please keep in mind that you might want to update your resume before you start writing out the application if you haven't done that already. We are planning to select 5 fellows, and we're anticipating announcing those selections in mid-April. So just a few weeks after the application is due. And so we'll take questions at the end of this info session today, but also we have an email address, which is here, also on our website. Feel free to contact us anytime with questions. If you go to the next slide. Thank you. So who's eligible to apply? We've intentionally made eligibility quite broad because we want to cultivate a really diverse cohort of fellows. So I'll describe what we're requiring and also what we're not requiring. So we're looking for fellows, first and foremost, who can represent environmental justice communities in the United States. So representation could mean that they're a member of that community from birth or from later part in their life. It could mean that they're doing work on behalf of that community, but they have some kind of connection to on-the-ground environmental justice communities in the US. Second, that they have a record of engagement, that they've either done some mixture of advocacy or public service work or organizing or journalism or policy development or scholarship on behalf of, with, or as a part of an environmental justice community. And that can be in any number of different areas. We view climate justice and environmental justice as connected to a wide range of environmental, ecological, sociological issues. So just as a handful of examples, we talk here about planning and development, tree canopy, stormwater management, water quality, remediation, really anything under the environmental sphere we view as part of the climate justice connected set of issues. Fellows do have to have the legal right to work in the United States. And the reason for that is that Harvard is paying a stipend to the fellows. And so therefore it's necessary to have that right to work That needs to cover the fellowship program period, which will be June through December of 2022. So some of what we're not requiring, we are not requiring any previous technical experience in either data science or design. In fact, we hope that a core benefit of participating in the fellowship program is that fellows will leave with new skills and a greater understanding and ability to use tools in data science and design. So pre-existing experience is not required, although it is welcome. And also, we're not requiring any particular academic degree. And the reason for that is that, on the one hand, we're not trying to narrow the cohort to people with a certain specific background, but also we are open to fellows at a range of levels of experience and seniority, including current students. So if you're a current undergraduate or graduate student or pursuing another degree, we welcome you to apply. Next slide. So we're evaluating on the basis of 4 primary categories of criteria, and these basically map onto the questions that are asked in the application. So we have a question that sort of gets at what is your commitment and past experience with climate and environmental justice. We're looking for people who have demonstrated involvement and engagement in projects that are directly related to climate and environmental justice issues in communities. Secondly, we're looking for relationships to a community, either individually or through an organization or through a government entity as part of public service. We really value applicants who have established connections to environmental justice communities that can help extend the impact of the work that they do as part of the fellowship program by providing it back to and connecting it to those communities. We're looking, of course, for the ability to make a difference. One of the questions that we ask in the application is, how will the fellowship program benefit you? What do you want to do? How do you want to benefit from being a fellow? And we mean that in terms of 2 dimensions. One is for you individually as a fellow. How will this help you advance your work? How will it help you advance your career? And then also to society. How will the work that you do as a fellow connect back to the work that you're doing for community today? How will it make it better? How will it enable you to do more and new things? And then lastly, we're looking at lived experience as well. We do ask that fellows submit a CV or a resume, which gives us some idea of your experience. And we are trying to balance the kind of complementarity of experiences, lived experience across the cohort. So that's one of the things that we're thinking about as we select fellows. And again, we're only choosing 5 fellows in this first pilot program. So we recognize it'll be difficult to really achieve true representation of our huge and wonderful country, but we're going to do as best as we can to balance the types of backgrounds and experiences and goals of the fellows that we invite to join us.
Maybe just to add that we are interested or open to people who would be interested in being involved and maybe not necessarily directly as a fellow. So that's just something that we've talked about.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah, we've talked to a few folks who may be interested in, for example, joining some of our cohort meetings, but wouldn't have the time availability or for other reasons wouldn't want to be a full part of the fellowship program. And we welcome you to reach out to us for those kinds of opportunities as well. Great. So on the next slide, we have our rubric, and I recognize that this would be a lot to read or for me to go through line by line, so I'm not going to plan to do that, but we will make this available. We're going to post this recording. So if you'd like to take a closer look to see exactly how we're thinking about these different dimensions, we want to be transparent about that and give you a clear view into how we're doing selection. So we do provide the rubric here. You'll see that the 4 rows here correspond exactly to the 4 categories that we discussed in the previous slide. One thing I wanted to address, because it's a question that's come up a few times since we posted the application, the work that's done by fellows at Harvard is governed by Harvard's global intellectual property policy, and that's linked here if you'd like to see the full details. This is a pretty standard policy among universities that dictates what happens with work created by fellows or other types of visiting scholars. There are slightly different terms if you're coming from a governmental institution or from a nonprofit or from a for-profit company, and all those details and differentiation are spelled out at the link here. But basically, there are 2 things that we'd like you to know. One is that although we do have a relationship with corporate partners, and in particular, the fellowship program is connected to Google and the data commons, those corporate partners don't have any control over the work that fellows do. They don't retain any access to or rights about the work that fellows create. It's really separate from those corporate partners. And then secondly, the purpose of the fellowship program is to empower advocates and our fellows with tools and work products that come out of the fellowship program, so they can bring it back to their work, bring it back to their community, bring it back to their host organizations, and benefit from it and apply it. So that's our primary outcome, is for you to be able to take the work that you do back to your community and use it. We hope also that you'll want to share it publicly, and there'll be opportunities to celebrate and promote that work. And so one opportunity we do anticipate is that Google may be interested in sharing some of your work through a public blog. And so if that opportunity arises, we hope that fellows would consider it, but we don't require it by any means. Okay, so we thought we'd show you a few examples of projects that fellows will create. But of course, this is our first year doing the program. So we haven't had fellows in the past, and we haven't had literal fellowship projects before. So Jill and I thought a little bit about some projects that we were thinking about as we designed the program and that were inspiring to us. And we thought we'd share those examples with you. These aren't meant to be constraining. This is not a template that you have to follow to do a project, but we hope they're interesting examples that make this a little bit more concrete for you. So first I'll talk about an example from my own work looking at distributional impact analysis for water pollution in Massachusetts. And then Jill will share some work from some of her students looking at scenario planning and tools that allow you to explore alternative futures. So the first tool from my own work is focused on the issue of sewage pollution in Massachusetts. My collaborators and I developed a website at openmn.org, which we call the Archive of Massachusetts Environmental Data. And it collects together a variety of different public data sources, mostly from governmental agencies, that help us shine a light on the environmental justice impacts of sewage pollution. So unfortunately, sewage is discharged routinely in our state and many others from the sewage system into public waterways. So that means that human waste ends up flowing into rivers. It ends up flowing by public parks and where people are boating and recreating. It flows by hospitals and schools. And of course, there are significant public health implications of that. So prior to our work, as far as we're aware, no one had explicitly, quantitatively asked what the distributional impact, what the relative risk due to sewage pollution is for more vulnerable and less vulnerable communities. So that's what we set out to do. So the first step in this is just breaking down Massachusetts into its constituent watersheds, which gives us a sense for how the pollution will impact different communities. And you can see that there's a wide variation. We have some especially very highly urbanized watersheds in our state around the Boston area and other cities like Springfield and Lawrence, with very high levels of environmental justice indicators, like fraction of the population that is non-white, that is near the federal poverty limit, and that is linguistically isolated, meaning that only English is not spoken in the household. And if you go to the next slide, part of what we did is to build interactive maps through our website that take that information about watershed level environmental justice indicators coming from data sources like the US Census and EPA, and then maps that against the location of sewage pollution, where this is actually impacting people, where these outfalls are, how much pollution, how many gallons of sewage are discharged from each of those outfalls. And then we combine those together in the next slide, we can start to ask questions about how they're related. So if you click one more through, yeah. So on the x-axis of this plot is the environmental justice indicator. This is in terms of income. So lower income communities are on the right-hand side. And then on the y-axis is just the total aggregate level of pollution annually in terms of millions of gallons are discharged to each of these watersheds. So in a just and equitable state, there would be no relationship between these variables. You would see a flat line because it shouldn't matter where you live or if your community is vulnerable as to how much sewage pollution you are at risk from. But in reality, we find that there's a very strong relationship, that more vulnerable communities experience a much greater burden of sewage pollution. So we showed this for Massachusetts across a variety of indicators. And then on the next slide, I'm glad to report we have a happy outcome from this story. We use this as an advocacy tool to push for legislation that was passed into law and signed into law last year that is requiring some improvements around public communication for sewage overflows. So now it is law in the state of Massachusetts that when a water authority discharges sewage into a public waterway, they have to reveal that. They have to disclose that and notify the public. And this was not previously a requirement in Massachusetts. So we think this is a great step, an example of how an environmental justice lens can be helpful to advocacy campaigns around an important issue like this. And we hope it's a useful example of how data-driven tools can be used to support that kind of advocacy.
Great, thank you so much, Nathan. It's really an excellent project and a great example. The example that I'm going to talk about, I actually have no personal involvement in. I just have the pride of having had one of the students and initiators as a student, and now she is. Her name is Anna Corsi, and she's at Sasaki, which is a design firm, and they developed a tool in conjunction with the National Recreation and Parks Association. And so I thought it was just a great example to see how design and not-for-profits could work together around some of these issues of climate peril and of how do we actually engage with this and kind of and think about our own stewardship of the landscape and how we could be proactive against it. And so this is a tool, it's a publicly accessible tool called Climate Park Change. And it was developed out of Sasaki's office in Denver. So it focuses on the Intermountain West part of the United States. And so basically what it does is it takes, as we're sort of discussing this, countrywide data sets and tools and starts to aggregate these tools and aggregate these sets of data towards visualization. So you can visualize different types of different threats, I guess, and their projected change in their scenarios over time. And you can do this, you should play with it. You can do this with a number of different threats. In this case, we're looking at wildfires or looking at inland flooding. And so you can kind of identify the county that you're in and what the kind of projected scenarios are as you go forward. But I think what I really wanted to highlight with this is not just this kind of map and the aggregation of data and the visualization of different data together, which I think is very much at the core of this project, but also how you then think through some of these scenarios as a person who's designing parks, as a person who's managing parks, and you think through what might be potential, what are narratives, what are stories, what are particular case studies that we could look at, and what are tools that we might consider in relationship to this scenario. And so these are particular tools to the Mountain West and to these parks, but how do you kind of think about our future action, and perhaps with this fellowship even go further to kind of evaluate some of those questions, because I think as we're facing questions about how to live now, how to deal with the climate, we're thinking about adaptation, we're thinking about mitigation, but sometimes some of our best intentions are maladapted. So how do you actually consider these and develop scenarios that would make sense for the kind of work that you're doing, in this case, for a design firm working on parks, but for an agency that is managing those parks and making decisions about their future. So those are just to give you a sense of the types of projects, but we're really actually excited by what types of projects you might bring and how we can kind of engage in this work together. And so we'll open it up to questions now, but I just wanted to summarize, I guess, the key things, which is the fellowship. I probably should have put the website on this here too, but if any of you don't have the website, we can post it in the chat. But applications are due March 18th. We'll use our rubric to evaluate and to kind of develop a cohort and notify you by April 25th, and that the program duration is from June to December of 2022. And again, it doesn't require travel or being in person, but it does require a commitment to being available and engaged during that time. Right. All right. So with that, I would love to hear if you guys have questions or if there's anything that we can help to clarify. So now please ask them. You can either, I guess, raise your hand or ask them in the chat. I'll open the chat now, or you can email us if questions come up later, and we're happy to answer those questions. We've also been having some individual meetings and things like that if time permits to discuss it. So great, I see a question. Christian, I believe.
Yeah. Hi, Jill, Nathan, Sophie. It's really nice to meet you. Thanks again for this opportunity. The organization that I work with are primarily focused on the Boston waterfront, which is really exciting. There's obviously a lot of study that's linking public health to access to these public blue and open and green spaces, but there's a lot of assumptions in terms of usage of these spaces. We're trying to essentially redesign our waterfront, like many cities that are dealing with the impacts of climate change, but we're trying to prepare for those impacts, and we want to get inclusiveness right. And part of the question that I have is in terms of the data set, and sort of a quick glance at sort of the data commons link that you shared. Migration data isn't one of the sets that is apparent to me. So the question I have is this the primary source of your data sets. If the data that I'm hoping to look for or to measure isn't apparent in here, does that sort of limit my window in terms of participating in this fellowship?
Great question.
It's a
Oh,
good
Jill,
question.
do
Yeah,
you
Nathan,
wanna
go
take
for
that?
it. Go for it.
Sure. It's such a great question. I'm so glad you raised this. So the answer is no. Fellows are by no means limited to the data sets that are already included in the Data Commons project. In fact, our technical resources at the IQSS and also at Data Commons are there to help us integrate new data sets. So if it's a data set that already exists from a public agency, and perhaps I'm not exactly sure, but maybe US Census data, for example, could help us to gather the kind of migration statistics. Part of the project could be to do that integration. If data collection is needed, original data collection is needed, that could be an interesting part of a fellowship proposal. I would say that over the relatively short fellowship period, it may not be possible to do a large-scale data collection project, but maybe designing that data collection in a thoughtful way with inclusion in mind could be part of a project. But the short answer is no, definitely not limited by existing data sets. And in fact, integration of data sets in new ways is a core part of the program.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Nathan.
Great. There's a question in the chat saying regarding the well-connected to our community aspect, are you looking for longer term experience working with one community, or are shorter term experiences working with multiple communities seen just as valuable? And yeah, I think, intentionally we haven't placed any, we're looking for a wide range of fellows and cohorts with wide ranges of, I guess, experience or length of experience. And so I think that the length of time is not something that will factor into it, but I think we do want to feel like you are very locally connected and that there is a relationship that's well established to that community and that there's trust and access and all of those things. So we're looking for the nature of the relationship rather than the length of time.
I think I see a question from Cecilia.
Yeah, hi. I have a question about if we're able to because I'm pretty sure that in the area that I would like to work, there's not a lot of data already collected.
Early, I didn't have any signal. Oh, that's okay.
Sorry, I think someone's not muted. Oh, thank you.
I was wondering if that could be built into the fellowship, the data collection aspect of it. Like if there would be support for me to be out there in the communities collecting the data and building that into the project.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think projects that require original data collection absolutely could be a good fit. I think the primary limitation is that although we have some technical resources to help us with data integration and analysis and visualization and software development, we wouldn't have resources to directly support data collection. So that would be something I think the fellow would really have to either bring themselves or maybe have a plan to do as a follow-up to the fellowship program. One thing that I think our network of advisors and our board of mentors could maybe support is the design of a data collection program to help the fellow develop a plan, especially to keep ways to access in representative ways within environmental justice communities, ways to build inclusive questionnaires, things like that could be really valuable. But I would anticipate in that case, maybe the data collection is actually happening after the fellowship program, after that design work is done. And so that would, maybe shape the scope of the fellowship project proposal.
Okay, that'd be really cool. Thank you.
There's one other question that I just wanted to clarify, which has to do with the relationship to communities that are global or that are not necessarily US based. And so the requirement for the US based really has to do with the fellow's ability to be compensated. And so as long as the fellow themselves is in a relationship where they can receive the stipend, you could be working with a community that's outside of the US. And the Data Commons does extend beyond that, but we want to just make sure that we can support you as the individual entering into this cohort. So that is just a slight clarification around that question. I saw a hand up. Ben, did you have a question?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
So thank you guys for the presentation. My question is specifically tailored to once we find this data, which it seems like you guys have a really great database for, will part of the fellowship be how to use this data when we go back to our communities to help inform, community-led decisions? And then specifically using that water rights example, so those of us who have deep connections within a certain community, a lot of times that involves a lot of where you have to go to the city or to the governing body. Will that be part of the fellowship, learning how to use that information, tailoring that towards change? Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
first of all, sorry, Jill, did you want to go? Yeah, first of all, to the second point, absolutely. We hope that, especially for fellows who are coming in from advocacy positions, learning new ways to communicate using data and to engage policymakers and stakeholders using data, we hope will be a key benefit of the fellowship program. So we hope in that scenario, that person is going back to their community, having gone through the fellowship, equipped with new tools that they've created with the support of our resources, and using them in their communication advocacy work. That could be, maybe the next time you sit down for a session with the legislator, whereas in the past you might have only been able to communicate with verbal talking points. Now you also have an interactive tool that you can show them that helps them directly see impacts on their community that you're talking about. So I hope I answered both your questions there. I think the first one was about whether or not you can use those tools, and the second was if you'll learn new ways of using them and communicating, and the answer to both of those would be yes.
Great. Well, great. Thank you, everyone, for. Oh, there's another message. Let's see what it
Just a
says.
thank you.
Oh, just a thank you. Just what I was going to say. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And we really hope that you'll consider applying to the fellowship. And if questions arise, please feel free to reach out to us at any point. But I won't take more of your lunch hour. But it's been lovely, lovely seeing you all here and meeting you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks again.